Well, so welcome everybody. Our talk today will be about the project Apache DeltaSpike, which is the CDI toolbox. This is the same talk that I gave 2 weeks ago in the Java one, and it's a pleasure to talk about this project to you. Well, my name is Rafael. My name is Rafael Benevides. I've been working for Red Hat for 6 years as a software engineer, and one of my roles are to help developers all over the world to be more productive with Red Hat projects, Red Hat products, and open source projects in general. So here are my contacts. If you want to send any questions, get in touch with me, anything else, be welcome. So the question is, if this session is right for you, this is a talk about CDI project. If you have minimal knowledge about CDI, what I mean, if you have ever used CDI, if these annotations or classes are familiar to you, this talk might be very interesting for you and your projects. Okay? So basically what I will talk today is what is the DeltaSpike project, why is it so interesting. I'll talk a little bit more about its core models and other DeltaSpike models, and open time for questions and answers, okay? And this talk is also available at this address if you want to see it again later. Well, so the question is, what is DeltaSpike? First of all, we need to understand where DeltaSpike came from. Well, the CDI specification was initially was released in 2011, and since that time, there were a lot of initiatives from different companies to provide features for CDI. Among them, I can show you here the Sentry, there were the Apache MyFace Cody, and then they realized that they were going at the same way. So they decided to join their efforts, merge their codes, and have just a single project as a true source of CDI extensions. So, in the end of 2011, they decided to merge the project, and just a few months later, in the beginning of 2012, they had their first release, 0.1, and finally, almost a year later, this project it started as an incubator project, and in 2013. On the version 0.4, it became a graduated project, okay? And finally, in June of 2014, it had the first final release. And since then, the project is very active, having a release each 2 or 3 months. So the last release that's available on the website is the version 1.5.1, and should be there should be a new release on the next month, about 1.6 or 1.52, depending on the features that became stable or not. Okay. So, how CDI and DeltaSpike are related? The first thing that we need to understand is that the CDI is just a specification for context and dependency injection. That's it. It doesn't provide any feature, any business feature. But it has something very powerful on this specification, which is called CDI portable extension. This feature makes total difference in the specification because it allows CDI to be extendable. You can extend CDI, and this is one of the most powerful features of CDI. But it's not very popular. Why? Because the API is it's complex. There's no much documentation about it. So it's powerful, but it's not very used. So I told you this is powerful, but it's powerful. Why? Why this portable extension is so powerful? Well, before allowing you to extend CDI, to extend Java EE, it also provides features to integrate third-party libraries, and it also allows you to modify the behavior of your CDI beans, create new scopes, change the behavior, how the injection works, where the bean that it's being injected will come from. Well, it's powerful because it's extendable and can change the behavior of your Java application. So let's see how that works. To create an extension, the purpose of this talk is not to teach you how to create an extension, but it's good to have an understanding how the extension is created, so we can have an idea how DeltaSpike can help the CDI projects. Okay? So after the application is initialized, you can't do nothing. So every change, every extension has to happen during the boot time. So when your application is booting, is starting, you have the possibility to change the behavior, to add new beams, to add new scopes, to modify the metadata of CDI. Okay? What, in practice, how that works? If I want to create an extension, basically I need to implement the extension interface, and then observe events that happen during the boots of CDI, and how the CDI will have knowledge about the existence of that extension. Well, inside the meta-inf folder, inside meta-inf service folder, you will create a file with the name of the extension interface, and inside that file, you will put the name of the class that you created. And then, when CDI is starting, it will look inside this file and know that there is a class that contains the extension to be loaded when the CDI is being loaded as well. So these are some of the events that happens before your application is started. So when you boot a CDI application, there will be an event for before the bean discovery process, during the processing of the annotated type, after type discovery, and a lot of events, and each one of these events allows you to get metadata and modify that metadata on that specific moment in time. That's why you need to observe these events and change the behavior of CDI. So, an example here. Suppose that you want to create an extension that forbids any entity class to be injected. which is a good practice because the entities are managed by JPA. And if you inject an entity, it will be also managed by CDI. This is not a good practice. So it's a good practice to avoid it. And you can avoid it by doing an extension. So you can create an extension by implementing its class, observe the process annotated type event for the classes that has the annotation entered, and with that metadata, you just veto that bean to be injected. You don't need to worry much about the code because, as I told you, this is not the objective here. I just want to show you how the extensions are important to make CDI, or to extend CDI, okay? So, what do you need to know? That the extensions are launched during the bootstrap of the CDI events because it has to be before the application starts, because after that the bean manager is on read-only mode. Okay, basically you need to observe the event. So what is DeltaSpike? DeltaSpike is a collection of portables, CDI portables extensions. It's a collection of extensions that each one of these extensions provides different features for CDI. And not only for that. Remember that I told you that create an extension is something that's not very popular. It's hard, the API is hard, there are few documentations. And here is another advantage of DeltaSpike. Because DeltaSpike allows you, it helps you to create your own portable extensions. Not only it provides new features, but helps you to create new extensions. Well, it's interesting to say that DeltaSpike is well tested with different versions of CDI, including the 2.0 release, 2.0 version of the specification, which is not final yet, it's being developed. And the CDI 2.0 is being developed, and DeltaSpike is already using it to test it, to be sure that once that CDI 2.0 is released, DeltaSpike will be working with it. And also with a lot of different application servers and different versions of it. Okay? Well, I told you that DeltaSpike helps you to build your own extensions. Look, let's see here an example of that. Suppose that you want to get a specific class and add a new scope on that. You have the bean builder class, which you can use it to read a specific class, and then you modify it by calling the bean builder methods like edge types, edge scopes, session scope, application scope, and then you modify that user class to add that scope and make that class available. This is how DeltaSpike can help you to build your extension. But of course, what brings most attention to DeltaSpike is the features that already are implemented, so you don't need to implement the extension yourself. I will show you these features when I'm talking a little bit more about the DeltaSpike modules. Well, why DeltaSpike is so interesting? Well, besides all the features that I will show you for you in a couple of minutes, you have to think that the DeltaSpike was recognized in the last year as with the Duke's Choice Award. This Duke's Choice Award is given to projects that are very revolutionary, that's very innovative. And in 2014, DeltaSpike won this Duke's Choice Award. Okay? And DeltaSpike has a lot of features, but unfortunately, I can't show you all of them in 50 minutes. That's why I will show you just a small piece of this project. I chose the features that I like the most, that I think that will give you more productivity, that will make your project move faster than if you were not using it. And of course, if after this talk, you can get more information about DeltaSpike going to the DeltaSpike site, website, which the URL is deltaspike.apache.org. So, DeltaSpike has a lot of features, general features, and also specific features. The most general features are on the core module, but of course there are also features for data, for JSF, for security, for scheduler, and we will see some of them. Okay, starting by the core module. Well, one of the first features that I want to show you is the exception handler of DeltaSpike. Well, most time when an exception occurs on our application, we want to treat that in a asynchronous way. Because treating it synchronously most of the time it's hard for performance, but not only because of that, but also I want, for example, suppose that exception happens on your application, and you want to get that error message and show in a user interface. Okay, that's one use for the exception. And you can also get that exception and print a log message. You can also get that exception and send it to a dashboard where administrator can see that it's happening an exception to your application. Or suppose that you can get that exception, send it to a queue, or send it to a database, send it to a log. So different uses for the same application. You can get that exception and treat that like an event for CDI. It's an event. Oh, it happened, exception on your application. Once that the exception is treated like an event, you can have a lot of different exception handlers, each one of them to a specific purpose. And each one of them being called in a synchronous way. So you can have the exception printed in the user interface by a specific handler. You can have the exception being logged. You can have the exception sent to administrative dashboard. Okay? So basically we will need to put the exception handler annotation in our class, specify which kind of exception this handler listens to, and treat that exception, and you can say, okay, this exception was handled, continue it to the other exception handlers. Well, DeltaSpike also gives you a way to identify the current project stage of your application. That's interesting. Why? Because sometimes during the life cycle of your application, application has different life cycles. It started in development mode, then after that goes to to unit tests, integration tests, staging. Finally, it reaches in production. On each stage, most of the time, we have to different behaviors on your application. For example, during the development, you have mock classes that should not be available on the production, right? Or, of course, in production, you expect to have another class that should never be available on the development. On those cases, you can identify, you need to identify if your application is being developed or is in production. DeltaSpike comes with a class called project stage that you can just inject that class, and then later on your code you can compare if the class that was injected is equals development, or is equals production, or is equals unit testing. So you can identify what's the project stage at that moment of your application. You can use that also in XHTML files. For example, suppose that your application wants to show a big red banner saying, this application is under development. You just place a code, like here, using JSF. If the project stage is development, show the big red banner there. So you can have different behaviors from your application. But the question is, by the way, DeltaSpike comes with the following predefined project stages. It comes with unit test, development, system tests, all of them that I talked about. But if your company uses a different project stage, a exotic project stage that's not covered here, you can create your own project stage. Okay? So, as I told you, how can I set the project stage in your application? You have to configure it in DeltaSpike. It's part of the DeltaSpike configuration mechanism. What is a configuration? It's just a key and a value. The key for that project stage is org Apache DeltaSpike project stage, and you set that at equal development or equal production. But here is another feature of DeltaSpike, because DeltaSpike allows you to get configuration from different config sources. Initially, you can get these key values from the meta-inf Apache DeltaSpike properties file per default. But of course, you can extend DeltaSpike to provide your own file for your application. But DeltaSpike, if you look for that value in this file, and if it doesn't find the configuration in this file, it will look on a JNDI in the following path. If it doesn't find the value there, it will look for environment variables, and if it doesn't find there, it will look on the system properties. System properties is like when you are starting the JVM, you place Java -d and the configuration value. This will override all the previous values, okay? But then you can use this configuration mechanism not only to provide DeltaSpike configuration, but you can also use the configuration API to configure your application. For example, suppose that you want to have a configuration of the username. You can use a DeltaSpike class called configResolver get proper value username, and DeltaSpike you look for username on the properties file, on the environment variables, on the JNDI value, on the system property. If it finds, you will have the value placed here. But here comes another feature. Suppose that you want to get the username of the database, and the username is different for production and for development. So instead of getting just the property value, you can use get project stage aware property value. You just say, I want to get the username. If the project stage is production, it will return undefined. If the project stage is development, it will return Benevides instead. So you didn't need to change the code. You just need to configure your application and it will get the proper value from the configuration file or configuration key that you used on those systems that I talked, mechanisms that I talked about. But remember, we are talking about Java. Java is very type safe, and of course, I give to DeltaSpike most of the time strings. But DeltaSpike allows me to get a value as an integer, for example. Suppose that I want to get the port as an integer. I just need to say, resolve that value as an integer. And also it's possible to make, if doesn't find any value in the configuration, use the following default value. And I also can have a converter, for example, in this case, where I have the date format using this specific format here, year, month, and day. I can use a custom date converter to return that as a date. So I don't need to get the value as a string and then convert it to integer or convert that to date, okay? But, as I told you, it's Java, it's type safe, but it's also CDI, which means that instead of using the API programmatically, I can also simply use the config property annotation and say the name of the key, and it will try to find that key in the configuration and inject that value here. And note that it will convert automatically if the value is integer, if the value is a string. Okay, that makes our life much more easy. Another feature of DeltaSpike is about internationalization. Most of us that are developers, we are developers, and as developers, today we do the application in our language, but most of the time that application will be used or translated to many other languages. And DeltaSpike allows you to make that in a type-safe way. Why it's type-safe? Because you create an interface, like here, I created an interface, and look at the signature of these methods. If I have a method here called welcome that returns a string. This will look for the resource bundle file for a key with a key called welcome. You can have, for example, like here, the name of the method is welcome to, and it receives a parameter. With each, the DeltaSpike will look for in the resource bundle for a key called welcome to, and whatever the parameter that I place here, it will go to this resource to the translation of the file. And of course, I can use not only the name of the method, but I can specify here the key that I want to use instead. So, how do I use that? Look here. I get that interface, inject it, and when I call, for example, message.welcome to Rafael, it will return the translation here. Welcome to Rafael. Very type safe. But then Or in the case of a log message, I can say log info message, font message. I invocate this method. And remember, the signature of the method returns a string. And of course, that string will look for the proper bundle file to get the proper translation and return it. And something that you may ask is, how can interface do everything like that? It's because DeltaSpike uses another model called partial bean that will create the implementation of runtime for that interface. Okay? And I can even use it on a JSP or JSF page. For example, I name it here message, and on JSP I can call message.welcome. It will return the same string that I've returned here. Okay? So this makes a lot easier when you have to refactor your system. It's Java, it's type safe, it's the compiler will check that and make our life very easy to get the errors on the compilation time. DeltaSpike also comes with an annotation called exclude. CDI 1.1 comes with the Vettel annotation, but the exclude it's better. And why it's better? Because Vettel only Vettels a bean from being injected, but just that. With exclude, I can define when the bean will be excluded. In this case, suppose that it's a mock class. This bean will be excluded unless I'm on the development project stage. Or, instead of that, this bean will be excluded except if the project stage is development. Or I can even create an expression that I can read that expression and define when the bean will be excluded or not. DeltaSpike also allows you to inject resources. So most of the time we want to read a file. So we have to have the path, declare it like a new input stream, new file, string reader, whatever. I can, instead of doing that much code to read a file, I can simply use the annotation injectable resource and the name of the file, and you have already the input stream of that. Actually, the DeltaSpike uses just the files that are available on your class path, but you can also implement the injectable resource provider interface to read this file, for example, from HTTP server, from a drive in your network, whatever. You can customize the behavior of DeltaSpike. As DeltaSpike is already an extension of CDI, you can also continue extending that DeltaSpike. Okay? Well, the data model. This is one of the models that I like the most, and you will see why. Because it brings you a lot of productivity. It means to be an implementation of a repository pattern. What is a repository? Well, Eric Evans said in his domain-driven design book that a pattern, this repository pattern, is a collection of objects of the same type. Like, for example, car repository is, of course, a repository of cars. User repository is a collection of users. When Java started to have the generics, it's common to see a lot of generic DAOs examples. Like you create a generic DAO where you say the type of the entity, the type of the key, and you have a superclass with the implementation of save, remove, find all. But with DeltaSpike, it's much more simple than that. You basically need to create an interface, extend the interface with the type it, the generic about the user in this case, use the annotation repository, and what will happen is that when CDI starts, when DeltaSpike starts, it will load this interface, use again the partial beam model, and create automatically the implementation for you about all these methods. You will have implementations about save, about remove, about find all, find by primary key, count, and many other methods will be automatically implemented for you. You don't need to worry. Remember, it's an interface. The implementation is created by DeltaSpike. So, but it's not only about those methods. Suppose that you want to create a query. Look, the beauty of this is a user entity, and you want to create a query. You just write the name of the method. It's an interface. The name of the method is find by username and password. What will happen? CDI automatically, when you call this method, it will generate a query for you, like select from user, where username and password are equal these values. The name of the method defines the query, so it makes much more verbose. Your code is much more verbose. It's more standard among all the teams. But of course, you don't need to always use this approach. You can create your own method signature and use the query annotation and write the query yourself. But take a look here. It's returning a list of rows. But suppose that I want to have more control on this query. Suppose that I want to do a pagination. So instead of returning a list, I can return the query result object. So I can do something like that. Find by age, query result of person. I can define the pagination in the query API style, like max results 10, the first results 50, get the result list. Or in a pagination, on a paging style, page with page size 10, which is the same results, go to page 5, get result list. It's really, really simple. You didn't need to write a single line of code besides the name of the method. I want to know how many pages are there on this result. Page it, count count pages, which will return the total number of pages. Once more, very, very simple, very quickly to do on your code. In the security model, suppose that you want to have a class that only people who has the admin role can call this method. You can use that in a type-safe way, like an interceptor style, where you create annotation, and you say this annotation that I created is a security binding type. What do I need to do now? Is just to write a method that do the logic about this interface. this method that contains the logic has a security annotation and must return Boolean. If the return is true, the user is admin in this case, the method here will be executed. If the method returns false, then you will receive a access denied exception. So this is very handy to have this style of security on your application. For people that are using JSF, remember that internationalization feature on the core model, where you have the interface and you write the name of the code and it returns a string? I can integrate that with JSF, because in JSF, when you have to send a message to the HTML page, you have to do get face context, add message, new face message object, define the severity. Then you could use internationalization like message welcome to and the parameters. That's the traditional way, but DeltaSpike comes with this object, JSF message, that you just need to inject it and call the following method. Message, add info, the severity, and call this method, and it's there. It's much more simple. Look here. How much code do you save using this class? Remember that I said that with extensions, I could even create a new scope. That's what DeltaSpike did. It created a new window scope. CDI does not come with CDI with Windows scope. So let's think. Most of the time, when we are in a web application, we want to have values or objects just for individual windows or individual tabs. It's rare when you have to share values between windows. In those cases, you could use session. So DeltaSpike allows you to use objects in the window scope. For JSF, you can also prevent the double submission. Most time, when the user have that feeling that the application is slow, he clicks several times, and that can make the application even slower, or it can even cause bugs if you process it twice or 3 or 4 times. So you can prevent that, but just including this directive on your JSF page, prevent double submit, and it allows you to do that. For scheduler module, who has worked with Quartz here before? Okay, most of the time, when you are inside Quartz, you need to implement the job, but who manages the instantiation of this class? It's Quartz. Since it's Quartz that instantiates this job, you don't have CDI capable of injecting beans inside this class, right? Because it's managed by Quartz. What DeltaSpike does is gives you the scheduler annotation where you can give it a cron expression. Suppose in this case I said don't need to schedule this on startup, and I can schedule it later, but the nice thing is that this job allows you to have CDI injection. So this is very, very handy for those that have worked with Quartz. Well, there are I talked about core, security, data, JSF, mentioned partial beam, scatter, but there is also features for beam validation and for servlet, which on Java EE6 CDI 1.0, the beam validation and the servlet was not integrated with CDI. It doesn't allow you to have injection. And before CDI 1.1, DeltaSpike allowed you to do that with beam validation and servlet models. So it's, DeltaSpike also works like a sandbox for the specification. You have the feature already implemented in DeltaSpike, and then after on the CDI specification, people think, oh, this is good to have in the specification. And like later on CDI 1.1 or 2.0, they include that. The test control and containers control allows you to have CDI tests available, because you can start a CDI from Java SE, and then with test control you can say, okay, now we start the conversation scope. Now kill the conversation and start the window scope. So you can even control which scope is available during your test. And then, and even with container control, start the CDI container and kill the CDI container. So this is very, very handy as well. Any questions?
You were talking about internationalization. Can you specify a little bit more what kind of compile time errors can we get?
For example, most of the time, let me see. Most of the, if you specify here, like traditional internationalization, if you specify here a key that it doesn't find on the configuration file, you will receive that interrogation marks as normal. But the point is, if it matches, and for any particular reason, you need to refactor your application, it's much more simple to change the key and then change your class, and with the class, the IDE will do the refactoring for you. Then you have to look in each one of the classes and rename it. Well, suppose you want to change welcome to Bienvenue. If in this way you have to change on the resource bundle file and change here, and you see the if you use the refactor of the IDE, you will see you have that changed on the whole application. But if you are not using DeltaSpike, you have to look for that string welcome on the whole application and change that for the Bienvenue. You see how that makes it easy? Well, for your question, I'll give you and right. This is to motivate people to do more questions. The lady.
When we prevent double submit, what's gonna happen if we have really double submit?
It will throw an exception saying that you have already submitted and you shouldn't do that. So you can treat that exception to show a message, or just let the error on the screen, which is not recommended. And drive for you too?
To have a session pair windows, all we have to do just declare to add the annotation, window context, and we will have for every page or every window session that can be shared with others.
No, it will just work. You just need to place the window scoped annotation, and that will, if you use, suppose that you have the user class with the window scope annotation, and you use that on this tab, it will be one instance here, and if you use that object on another tab or another window, it will be another instance of the same class. Okay? And that for you too. You're welcome. Any more questions?
About faces messages annotation, can you specify the severity in a property file? Like meta message and severity.
No, you cannot. It should be great. So what I suggest you is to go at the website of the project and open an issue for that, because it's really a good suggestion. But you have already your pen drive. You won't receive another for that question. Any more questions? Okay, so thanks so much. Merci. Shukran.